Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into the single biggest gamble of the American Revolution, the Siege of Yorktown. And let me tell you, this was so much more than just a battle. This was the all-or-nothing, high-stakes final play that would either secure a new nation's freedom or see the entire rebellion just fizzle out. To really get what was on the line at Yorktown, you first have to understand the sheer desperation of the moment. By 1781, the war had been dragging on for 6 long, brutal years. And that quote, that's not from some panicked soldier in a letter home. That's from the commander-in-chief himself, George Washington, basically admitting that the whole revolution was hanging by a thread.
All right, so here's how we're going to break it down. We'll look at how close America came to collapse, Washington's incredible gamble, how the trap was set, the siege itself, the shocking surrender, and finally, what it all meant for the birth of a new nation. Let's get into it.
So just how bad were things really? Well, calling 1781 a make-or-break year is almost an understatement. It wasn't just another year of fighting. It felt like the final chapter was being written. For the Americans, a huge, decisive victory wasn't just hoped for, it was absolutely necessary. Without it, the whole fight for independence was probably over.
I mean, just look at the situation. The war was grinding into its 7th year, and people were just tired. The continental currency was so worthless, it had become a literal joke. But for the soldiers, who hadn't been paid properly in ages, that wasn't funny at all. Mutiny was a real, constant threat. On top of all that, the British had a stranglehold on New York City, and down south, General Cornwallis's army seemed like an unstoppable force.
Washington knew he was staring at total collapse. He needed something big, a miracle, really. He had a plan, but then a single message arrived from his French allies. And this message presented an opportunity that was so massive and so incredibly risky that it forced him to bet the entire revolution on one single audacious move.
You see, for months, Plan A was simple. Team up with the French and attack the main British army under General Clinton in New York. It made sense, right? Go after the head. But New York was a fortress. Then, on August 14th, a letter shows up that changes everything. The French Admiral de Grasse was sailing his huge fleet not to New York, but to the Chesapeake Bay in Virginia. The only catch? He could only stick around until mid-October. The clock was officially ticking.
Washington didn't hesitate. He grabbed this new opportunity, deciding to march his entire army 400 miles south to trap Cornwallis. But the whole thing depended on keeping the British general in New York, Clinton, completely clueless. So what does he do? He puts on a show, a masterful piece of military theater. He has his men build these huge fake camps, complete with giant brick bread ovens to make it look like they were settling in for a long siege of New York. They even leaked fake attack plans. And, you know what? Clinton bought it, hook, line, and sinker.
So the race was on. Think about this. You've got Washington's army marching south, the French army right there with them, and a massive French fleet sailing up from the Caribbean. 3 different forces, all trying to get to the same tiny little spot in Virginia. And they had to get there before Cornwallis could figure it out and slip away, or worse, before the powerful British Navy showed up to save him.
And what happened next was just an incredible sequence of events. For maybe the first time in the entire war, everything, and I mean everything, went Washington's way. First, Admiral de Grasse's fleet gets there and blocks the bay. Then, on September 5th, he actually fights the British Navy in the Battle of the Chesapeake. Now, this was the absolute key to the whole plan. The French won, forcing the British ships to turn tail. This meant the French now controlled the sea. Cornwallis had no way out, and no one could get in to help him. When Washington's army finally arrived, the trap snapped shut. And the result of this perfectly timed plan? A truly staggering numerical advantage. The combined French and American force had over 17,000 troops. They were surrounding a British and German army of just about 8,000. That's more than 2 to 1. For an army trapped on a peninsula with absolutely no hope of escape, well, that's basically a death sentence.
So with Cornwallis completely trapped, the final phase began. And as one American soldier perfectly put it, the plan was now to dig him out shovel by shovel. This wasn't going to be some grand, glorious battle with cavalry charges. Nope. This was going to be the slow, methodical, and brutal work of 18th century siege warfare.
Now, the key to this kind of siege is a technique called digging parallels. The idea is actually pretty simple. First, you dig a huge trench that runs parallel to the enemy's defenses, but just far enough away to be out of cannon range. Then, from that main trench, you dig new trenches that zigzag forward. This creates a whole network of protective tunnels that let you slowly and safely inch your massive cannons closer and closer until you're right on top of them, ready to blast their walls to pieces. So, on the night of October 6th, thousands of men started digging in the dark. A few days later, the first parallel was done, and on October 9th, the bombardment started. Washington himself got to ceremoniously fire the very first American cannon. What came next was just a relentless storm of firepower. We're talking 3,600 shells a day raining down on the British. The Allies then started a second parallel, even closer this time, but there was a problem. Two small, stubborn British forts called redoubts were standing right in their way.
These two little forts, Redoubts 9 and 10, they had to be taken. So on the night of October 14th, the Allies launched a surprise attack. Washington gave a gutsy order: advance with unloaded muskets. He wanted them to rely only on the cold steel of their bayonets to keep things quiet. A French force took Redoubt 9, while 400 American troops, led by none other than a young, ambitious Alexander Hamilton, stormed Redoubt 10, yelling, "Rush on, boys, the fort's ours."
Once those redoubts fell, it was over. That was the checkmate. The Allies could now move their cannons right up to the main British lines. Cornwallis tried one last, desperate escape attempt, across the river at night, but a sudden, violent storm blew in and ruined his plans. His position was completely, utterly hopeless. The end was here.
On the morning of October 17th, a lone British drummer boy climbed up onto the defenses and started beating the rhythm for a parley. An officer came out behind him, waving a white handkerchief, and all across the battlefield, the cannons went silent. 2 days later, during the formal surrender ceremony, legend has it that the British musicians played an old song called "The World Turned Upside Down," a pretty fitting tune for a moment that was about to, well, turn the world upside down. The ceremony itself was just packed with drama. General Cornwallis, probably out of sheer humiliation, claimed he was sick and sent his second-in-command, General O'Hara, to do the dirty work. O'Hara tried to surrender his sword to the French commander Rochambeau, who basically just pointed him over to Washington. But Washington, seeing this obvious slight, refused to accept the surrender from a subordinate, and had O'Hara give the sword to his own second-in-command, Benjamin Lincoln.
The sheer scale of this victory was just immense. This wasn't just a defeated army running away. This was an entire captured army. Over 8,000 professional soldiers, 214 cannons, dozens of ships, all of it now belonged to the Allies. This was one of Britain's two main armies in all of North America. It was a catastrophic loss, and one their war efforts simply could not come back from.
As the news of the surrender spread, you had wild celebrations breaking out all across America. But in London, the reaction was stunned disbelief. The defeat at Yorktown was like a political earthquake, and it set in motion the final act of the American Revolution.
"Oh God, it's all over." That was the actual stunned reaction of the British Prime Minister, Lord North, when he got the news. And that right there is why Yorktown is so important. It wasn't just another military win. It was the political knockout punch that shattered Britain's will to keep fighting. They had now lost a second complete army in America, and the cost of the war in both lives and money was just too high to continue. And while a few small skirmishes continued here and there, Yorktown was the end of the line. Just 5 months later, Parliament voted to stop all offensive operations in North America. That vote led directly to peace talks, and those talks led to the Treaty of Paris, where Great Britain finally, formally, recognized the independence of the United States.
So I think the big thing to take away from all this is that American independence was never a sure thing. It was won because of a desperate, incredibly audacious gamble, a plan where literally everything, from the timing of a fleet to the success of a spy's deception, had to go perfectly right. And it just leaves you wondering, doesn't it? How razor-thin is that line between a victory that changes the world and a defeat that's just forgotten by history?